Chapter 4019. After sending a message to Ding Yi, Yang Kai raised his hand and laughed maniacally. "Here's a gift for all of you." Saying so, Yang Kai put away the good wish bag. An unpredictable light soared into the sky as the divine essence-fused light reappeared. The distorted light tore a hole in the sky, allowing everyone within 1,000 kilometers to see it clearly. A cry of alarm suddenly rang out from the crowd. "Ah, my sword!" With a shio sound, a sword flew straight towards the divine essence-fused light, while a shocked cultivator in the rear stared blankly, unable to understand how his artifact sword had suddenly flown out of his hand. What happened? Who is it? A series of chaotic cries rang out from the crowd as the faces of all the cultivator who had summoned their metal-related artifacts paled. A powerful suction force suddenly appeared from somewhere in the void, and the artifacts in their hands were all sucked away. The rest of the crowd also stared dumbfounded at the sky, watching as one artifact after another flew towards the divine essence-fused light at an incredible speed. After a brief moment of hesitation, the cultivator who had lost their artifacts hurriedly formed hand seals and sent out their divine senses in an attempt to recall their artifacts. How could they possibly recall them? The suction force of the divine essence-fused light was simply too powerful, and since they had already been sucked away, it was no different from throwing a meat bun at a dog. The cultivator who had first seen his sword fly into the divine essence-fused light did not have time to grieve as his face suddenly paled, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood, his expression suddenly becoming sluggish. The sword was connected to his divine sense, so after being washed away by the divine essence-fused light, it had lost a great deal of its spirituality, and even his divine sense had been damaged. It would take him at least a year or so to recover. *Pupiu. Countless people coughed up blood, as those who had tempered their artifacts with their divine sense were all injured at this moment. Only those cultivator who had not tempered their divine essence-fused light were unharmed, only losing their artifacts. But even so, their expressions were pained. "It's the divine essence-fused light!" Someone exclaimed. "The divine essence-fused light has the power to absorb artifacts. Everyone be careful." Not everyone's artifacts had been taken away. Hu Yi and the other heaven-opening realm masters were still desperately trying to resist the fluctuations of their artifacts. But when they heard this, their expressions became solemn, and they hurriedly put away their artifacts to avoid the misfortune of having their artifacts taken away. In a short time, all the artifacts that had been taken away dimmed and turned into piles of scrap metal, their spirituality completely gone. The divine essence-fused light can actually absorb secret treasures. Isn't Sword Pavilion in danger? Someone murmured. Hearing his words, everyone seemed to realize something and hurriedly turned their attention from the divine essence-fused light to the battlefield. At first glance, he was dumbfounded. The sword formation that had been rampaging through Dtion's group had been destroyed at some unknown point in time, and rays of sword light were flying towards the divine essence-fused light from Sword Pavilion's direction. No matter how the Sword Pavilion masters activated their divine essence-fused light, they were unable to take it back. Every member of Sword Pavilion cultivated the sword, and they even used secret techniques to temper their artifacts and swords. It could be said that the swords were closely linked to the lives of Sword Pavilion's disciples, and the majority of the abilities of Sword Pavilion's members rested on their swords. At this moment, with their swords taken away, the members of Sword Pavilion were like tigers that had their fangs pulled out. Moreover, they had even lost their swords that were linked to their lives, so there was naturally no way for them to use the sword formation. What's going on? Luo Qingyan was horrified. The sword in his hand had not been taken away. After all, he was a heaven-opening realm cultivator, and his foundation was not something that the Emperor realm could compare to. The moment he sensed that something was wrong, he had already tightened his grip on his sword. But at this moment, the sword in his hand was shaking uncontrollably, wanting to fly in a certain direction. He was completely focused on tangling with his sword, so how could he have the mind to kill his enemies? "It's that divine essence-fused light!" Lu Shui shouted, and her beautiful face was gloomy. "What a vicious brat!" Zhong Fan lowered his head and glared at Yang Kai, who was grinning wildly. Previously, Yang Kai had crazily shouted that he would give them a big gift, but no one had expected that gift to be a killing trap for Sword Pavilion. Just this move alone was enough to bury dozens of Sword Pavilion's elites here. In a flash, there was no time to think. Zhongfan roared, "Follow me." He was the first to put away his artifact, and a dense sword intent erupted from his body as he charged towards the weakest part of the group. However, they had relied on the might of the sword formation to kill their way in and out of the thousands of people in Dtion's group. Now that the sword formation had been destroyed, how could it be so easy for them to leave? Asterisk pu pu pu. Asterisk a series of muffled sounds could be heard as the Sword Pavilion's disciples spat out mouthfuls of blood. They looked extremely dispirited. When it rains, it pours. Unlike some people in the Emperor realm, it didn't matter if their artifacts were destroyed. They would only lose one artifact. The Sword Pavilion's disciples had refined their swords with a secret technique, and they were closely linked to their lives. Once their swords were destroyed, it would be a devastating blow to them. As the swords were sucked into the divine essence-fused light, their radiance dimmed, and the dozens of Sword Pavilion's disciples were greatly shaken. They were severely injured. Dingyi was dumbfounded. Previously, when the Sword Pavilion's disciples had set up the sword formation, it was so majestic that thousands of people in Dtion's group couldn't even fight back. The anger and grievance in Dingyi's heart were indescribable. He had already thought of retreating, wondering if it was worth it to provoke these lunatics from Sword Pavilion. However, after Yang Kai transmitted a message to him, the situation suddenly changed. After sword lights flew out from the Sword Pavilion's disciples' hands, the invincible sword formation was destroyed by itself. Following that, the Sword Pavilion's disciples spat out mouthfuls of blood. Their faces were pale, and it was obvious that they were severely injured. There was no need to hesitate. Dingyi pointed forward and grinned. "Kill him while he's down. Kill him." After saying that, he took the lead and rushed out. His entire body was shrouded in golden light, and the boundless sharpness was terrifying. It was obvious that he had activated the metal elemental energy in his Dao seal to increase his offensive power. Strictly speaking, although Dingyi's cultivation wasn't very high, his strength was still considered decent in the Emperor realm. Just from the metal elemental energy alone, it could be seen that ordinary people in the Emperor realm weren't his match. Furthermore, he should have condensed the heaven-splitting force that was above the 4th grade, or even the 5th grade. He probably had his own fortuitous encounters after spending a few months in the Great Void realm. With a single punch, the weather changed. Since their leader had already set an example, how could Dtion and the others be careless? With a loud crash, secret techniques blasted toward the Sword Pavilion's disciples from all directions. Having lost their swords, the Sword Pavilion's disciples were already greatly weakened. Now that their minds were severely injured, how could they resist such a dense attack? If the sword formation was still there, they wouldn't be afraid. However, the sword formation had long been broken along with their swords. Despair filled their eyes, but they couldn't dodge. They could only desperately activate their own strength to form a defense. At the same time, they took out their defensive artifacts. In an instant, layers of earthy yellow light lit up on the Sword Pavilion's disciples. Obviously, they had all activated the earth elemental energy. Some of them even performed the divine technique of the earth elemental energy. In particular, Zhongfan, who was the leader, held a huge shield in his hand. The huge shield was purely condensed from the earth elemental energy and looked extremely solid. However, in the face of the endless attacks, all of this was meaningless. Under the flashes of light, the defensive artifacts of the Sword Pavilion's disciples shattered one after another. Then, the earth elemental energy protecting them was also broken. Even Zhongfan's huge shield wasn't spared. As the attacks struck their bodies, the Sword Pavilion's disciples let out continuous shrill cries. Their lives exploded into a bloody mist in midair, and not even their corpses remained. In an instant, more than half of the Sword Pavilion's disciples were dead or injured. Even Zhongfan, Luo Qingyan, and Lu Shui were injured and dripping with blood. Dtion and the others were extremely excited. Earlier, They'd been crushed by the Sword Pavilion's sword formation, and they'd been suppressing their anger for a long time. Now that they saw hope for revenge, they naturally didn't hold back. After the first round of attacks, the second round of attacks arrived. The Sword Pavilion's disciples are finished. Hui watched helplessly as this thought flashed through his mind, and his face was extremely pale. Since he'd advanced to the heaven-opening realm, he'd never taken the Emperor realm seriously. The Emperor realm was his territory. But until today, when he saw the Sword Pavilion's disciples fleeing for their lives and saw Zhong Fan, a fifth-stage heaven-opening expert, like a stray dog, he finally understood that the saying "enough ants can kill an elephant" wasn't empty talk. After all, this was the great cosmological realm, and the main culprit was the indifferent young man, who was watching with his hands behind his back. Although Dition was the killer, in the end, the death of the Sword Pavilion's disciples was still blamed on the young man. If he hadn't released the divine origin magnet light, how could the Sword Pavilion's disciples have been defeated so easily? Turning his head to look at Yang Kai, Hui felt a chill run down his spine. This kid had killed heaven-opening realm cultivators like slaughtering chickens and dogs. Now that he had obtained the divine origin magnet light, who in the great cosmological realm would be his match in the future? Miserable screams rang out again. Dition's second round of attacks had wiped out the remaining Sword Pavilion disciples, leaving no one alive. Only the three heaven-opening realm leaders were still breaking out of the encirclement. From this, it could be seen that the foundation of the heaven-opening realm was different from that of the Emperor realm. Under the divine origin magnet light, they could timely control their swords and prevent them from being taken away. They also had the ability to protect themselves in the storm of attacks. Want to leave? Ding Yi's aura locked onto the fleeing Zhong Fan, and he shouted angrily, "Leave your life behind!" As he spoke, he threw another punch at Zhong Fan. The fist energy swept through the heavens and earth, and with the support of the metal element, its might was terrifying. Zhong Fan hurriedly turned around, gritted his teeth, and pointed a finger. On the tip of his finger, a stream of sword chi met the saber light. With a boom, the energy rampaged, and the fist energy shattered. Zhong Fan spat out a mouthful of blood, and his figure retreated explosively. He had already been injured by Dition's 2 rounds of attacks, and now that he had forcefully used his strength, he was almost no match for Ding Yi. Luo Qingyun hurriedly supported him, and exchanged a glance with Lu Shui. The two of them turned around, transforming into 2 streaks of sword light that enveloped the 3 of them. They instantly broke through the encirclement of Dition's group and fled into the distance, not even looking back. Chapter 40-20. Dozens of people from Sword Pavilion came aggressively under the leadership of 3 heaven-opening realm leaders. But in less than half an hour, they all fled with their faces covered in dirt. There were dozens of them when they came, but only 3 were left when they left. Even Zhong Fan, who was a 5th-stage heaven-opening realm cultivator, was severely injured and almost died on the spot. On the Origin Magnet Mountain, everyone was silent. Only Dition and the others were left shouting slogans, shaking the world. Ding Yi even looked up to the sky and laughed wildly, looking insufferably arrogant. His arrogant appearance made many people unhappy, but it was undeniable that after this battle, Dition's reputation had indeed spread, and there would definitely be a place for him in the great cosmological realm. Among the thousands of people present, many were already looking at Dition with shining eyes, considering whether to join in. After laughing wildly, Ding Yi came back to his senses and wanted to thank Yang Kai, but when he looked down, there was no trace of Yang Kai. Even the dozen people standing beside him had disappeared. "Where is Brother Yang?" Ding Yi asked the people around him. No one knew. Everyone was busy chasing after the people from Sword Pavilion, so who would pay attention to others' movements? However, one of the leaders of the Emperor realm below pointed and said, "They entered the Origin Magnet Divine Light." He had clearly seen that while Zhong Fan and the others were fleeing, Yang Kai had already led the dozen or so people around him into the underground cave, silently and without a sound. Ding Yi turned his head and saw that the Origin Magnet Divine Light was still spewing out of the hole created by the Earth Dragon. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, secretly admiring Yang Kai's courage. He had seen the power of the origin magnet divine light just now. Not only could it absorb secret treasures, but under the scouring of this divine light, those secret treasures would lose their spirituality in a very short time. How could they have a good ending if they jumped in directly? But soon, an unwillingness to admit defeat welled up in his heart. If Yang Kai dared to jump down, why wouldn't he dare? Moreover, this hole spewed out such dense origin magnet divine light, so there must be high-quality origin magnet divine stones below. This was a rare treasure. Without much hesitation, he waved his hand and called out, "Follow me." He took the lead and rushed into the cave. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived before the cave. Only when they got close did they realize how terrifying the divine essence-fused light was. When they sent their divine sense into it to investigate, it was immediately ground to dust, causing them to feel a slight headache. Dingy couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He wondered if he should wait and see what would happen. It wouldn't be worth it if he didn't get to eat the mutton, and got himself into trouble. A cultivator beside him also came in with a nervous look and said, "Boss, I'm afraid it's a little dangerous to jump in. Why don't we wait a little longer?" If he hadn't said that, Dingy would have really waited. But he had to persuade him. Dingy's neck stiffened. "What are we waiting for? There must be treasures down there. Didn't you see that Brother Yang has already jumped down? He must be looting. I'll go first." You all jumped down. A bitter expression appeared on that person's face. After Dingy finished speaking, he gritted his teeth and leaped forward, plunging headfirst into the hole. In order to avoid any accidents, he deliberately activated his own earth element power to protect himself. It could be said that he was well prepared. However, as soon as he jumped down, he suddenly screamed and shot out of the hole like an arrow released from a bow. Under everyone's gaze, Dingy appeared 1,000 feet away. But when they saw his current state, they were all shocked. At this moment, Ding Yi's earth elemental energy had been broken. Not only that, his clothes were in tatters, and there were countless tiny wounds all over his body. Blood had practically dyed his entire body red. As he stood in the air, Ding Yi's eyes were filled with shock, and there was lingering fear on his face. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Although they knew that the divine essence-fused light couldn't be trespassed at will, after all, those secret treasures had been washed away and turned into scrap metal. They didn't expect the power of the divine essence-fused light to be so terrifying. Dingy couldn't even hold on for a breath. If he had stayed in there for a while longer, wouldn't he have died without a complete corpse? If he was already like this, what about the young man surnamed Yang, and the dozen or so people around him? "I'm afraid that boy is doomed." A heaven-opening realm cultivator came up to Hu Yi and whispered. It had been half a cup of tea's time since Yang Kai jumped into the cave with the dozen or so people. There had been no movement for such a long time. So how could they have a good ending? Hu Yi's stiff face finally showed a smile. "It's good that he died." Seeing Yang Kai kill Liao Yibai with one move, Hu Yi was really afraid of Yang Kai. If this person was a heaven-opening realm cultivator, it would be fine, but he was just a sovereign. This kind of existence that transcended the norm was a blow to him. So he was naturally happy to see him die. "Master, are you all right?" A disciple of Di Tian rushed up to Ding Yi and asked. Ding Yi raised his hand and said, "I'm fine." Although he said so, there was still a lingering fear on his face. Fortunately, he had reacted quickly just now. Otherwise, something really might have happened. Thinking about how Yang Kai had already been in there for so long, he immediately came to the same conclusion as Hu Yi and the others. That Yang Kai probably didn't have a good ending. Thinking of this, Ding Yi's expression brightened. He waved his hand and said, "Surround this cave. Kill anyone who dares to trespass." If Yang Kai died, then no one would care about the treasures below. The divine essence-fused light couldn't be endless. There had to be a moment when it stopped. When that time came, he would lead Di Tian and the others down to plunder. Then most of the treasures would belong to him. Di Tian and the others received the order and gathered around the cave. In the blink of an eye, the cave was completely surrounded. This action naturally angered everyone. But Di Tian and the others had the might of the slaying sword pavilion, so they were not afraid. Even if the surrounding cultivators glared at them, they were still calm. At the same time, Under the divine essence-fused light, a group of more than 10 people was surrounded by Yang Kai's earth elemental power and kept going deeper into the cave. Contrary to what Hu Yi and Ding Yi thought, not only was Yang Kai not dead, he didn't even show any signs of injury. Not only him, but the Crimson Star disciples were also unharmed. Under the earth elemental power's protection, the divine essence-fused light couldn't penetrate them at all. Yang Kai had now condensed the power of wood, fire and earth. However, he still didn't know what grade these three powers were. He couldn't ask anyone about this, so he could only figure it out himself. If the wood elemental power condensed from the immortal tree's essence was classified as a 9th grade power, then the Golden Crow primordial fire and Earth Dragon's dragon pearl might be an 8th grade power. In other words, he had now condensed at least one 9th grade power and two 8th grade powers. However, this divine essence-fused light was only a 6th grade power, so how could it hurt Yang Kai and the others under the protection of an 8th grade earth elemental power? That being said, Yang Kai's consumption of qi was not small, so he had no choice but to constantly activate the earth elemental power in his Dao seal. Otherwise, even if he was fine, the others would be in danger of dying. Even Yu He was no exception. After all, her strength was only at the 5th grade, so she couldn't resist the scouring of this divine essence-fused light. Divine essence-fused stone! A disciple exclaimed as he descended, apparently having seen the treasures around the cave walls. As soon as his voice fell, Yang Kai had already reached out and retrieved the divine essence-fused stone. At first glance, it was only a 4th grade divine essence-fused stone, so he didn't take it to heart and casually tossed it into his space ring. Yang Kai didn't know how deep this hole dug by the Earth Dragon was to draw out the divine essence-fused light from underground. As he continued to descend, he would occasionally find some divine essence-fused stones around the cave walls. Yang Kai easily collected more than a dozen divine essence-fused stones along the way, but the highest was only a 4th grade while the rest were basically 2nd grade and 2nd grade divine essence-fused stones, so they weren't very valuable. After descending for about 3,000 meters, the space below suddenly opened up, and everyone seemed to have fallen into a sea of divine essence-fused light. However, in just 2 breaths of time, the group rushed out of the sea of divine essence-fused light. In their field of vision, a brilliant and beautiful world suddenly appeared. This was a huge cave, and everywhere in the cave, there were flashing lights, each of which represented a divine essence-fused stone. Looking up again, above the cave, a vast expanse of divine essence-fused light was continuously pouring out of the cave. Obviously, this was the source of the divine essence-fused light. Yang Kai had collected an entire bag of divine essence-fused light using his good wish bag before, so he hadn't expected there to be such a large amount stored underground. This situation made everyone's heart ache. If there was another artifact like the good wish bag, they might be able to collect more. Yang Kai had thought about using his sealed world bead to collect these divine essence-fused stones before, but after trying it out while falling, he had no choice but to give up. After the 6th grade divine essence-fused light entered his sealed world bead, it actually put some pressure on it. It didn't matter if he collected a small amount, but if he collected too much, his sealed world bead would be in danger of collapsing. According to the current storage capacity of this divine essence-fused light sea, it would run out in at most a stick of incense worth of time. At that time, the people above would definitely come down to search for treasures. In other words, Yang Kai and the others only had a stick of incense worth of time left. It was unknown how large it was. It was impossible for Qi Xing and the others to completely search this place, but since they had taken the initiative, their harvest was naturally not small. After agreeing to meet up here, Yu He led Qi Xing and the others to search in one direction, while Yang Kai headed in another direction alone. Along the way, Yang Kai released his divine sense and ignored all divine essence-fused stones below grade 3, only collecting those above grade 3. The underground cave was indeed extremely large. Yang Kai had been running for an entire day, but he still hadn't reached the end, and from time to time, there would be some forks in the road, making him dizzy. After such a long time, the people on the divine essence-fused mountain should have already descended, but such a large underground space was enough for them to search. After another day they finally reached the end. In these 2 days, Yang Kai's harvest could be said to be envious. He had collected more than 100 pieces of divine essence-fused stones of 4th grade, more than 30 pieces of 5th grade, and 4 pieces of 6th grade. In terms of value, the divine essence-fused stones he found in these 2 days were worth about 100 million opening heaven pills. And this was only his own harvest. Even if he and the other Qi Xing disciples' harvest were not as good as his, it would definitely not be too little. The only fly in the ointment was that they did not find any divine essence-fused stones of 7th grade or above. Yang Kai thought that there would definitely be materials of 7th grade or above under this divine essence-fused mountain, but he didn't know if there really wasn't any, or if he was just unlucky and had searched in the wrong direction. At this moment, it was too late to change the direction of the search. With more than 2,000 people on the divine essence-fused mountain pouring in, no matter how many treasures there were underground, it would not be enough to keep them. He didn't know if others had found divine essence-fused stones of 7th grade or above. After pondering for a moment, Yang Kai seemed to have thought of something and grinned silently. With his hands behind his back, he calmly returned the way he came. Halfway back, a group of more than a dozen people came in front of him. When they saw someone in front of them, they could not help but be surprised. The leader of the group even shouted, "Who is it?" With this shout, these more than a dozen cultivators secretly urged their strength, ready to attack. Yang Kai walked over unhurriedly, not stopping for even a moment. However, he didn't show any excessive hostility, making these people somewhat unsure of what this guy's intentions were. When he got closer and saw Yang Kai's face, the leader of the cultivators said in surprise, "It's you didn't die?" Previously on the divine essence-fused mountain, everyone thought that Yang Kai and Qi Xing's group were dead for sure. After all, they had gone down for so long without any movement, so how could they be safe? Only now did they know that Yang Kai was actually alive and well. "Why would I die?" Yang Kai chuckled. The cultivator who spoke mumbled for a while, then forced a smile and cupped his fists. "Lord Yang's divine skills are unparalleled. I admire you." Although they were all in the Emperor realm, this person did not dare to be arrogant in front of Yang Kai. Previously, he had seen the leader of the mysterious Cloud Society, Liao Bai, die under Yang Kai's spear with his own eyes. For a moment he felt a little uneasy. Meeting this god of death in such a place, would he be tempted by the wealth? If a conflict really broke out, with his strength, the dozen or so people on his side would not be able to resist. But they didn't think that Kai Yang would just let out a grunt and walk past them. The dozen or so people secretly sighed and looked at each other, feeling a little absurd, as if they had just survived a disaster. That's right. Yang Kai suddenly turned around and looked at them. "Lord Yang, what orders do you have?" The leading cultivator quickly asked respectfully. "Don't go forward. There's nothing good in front. Let's change direction." Yang Kai dropped a sentence and quickly disappeared. Only when Yang Kai's footsteps disappeared did they confirm that Yang Kai had really left. Someone asked, "What did he mean?" "Idiot, he came from that side. So he must have taken the good things first." The person who asked suddenly realized, "No wonder we only found divine essence-fused stones under the 3rd grade along the way. So it was he who slipped through the gaps between his fingers." Fortunately, Yang Kai was in a hurry and did not care about those materials under the 3rd grade. Otherwise, they would not have been able to find anything along the way. "Let's change direction." How could the leading cultivator hesitate? He quickly led his people to the nearest fork in the road and turned into another passage. Yang Kai returned along the original path and encountered many cultivators. Some were in groups of 3 to 5, some were in groups of 10, but at most there were 30 to 50 of them. They were all very surprised that Yang Kai had survived. Some of the smarter ones saw Yang Kai coming from the front and immediately changed the direction of their search without needing him to remind them. Yang Kai spent more than a day to return to the entrance. Looking up, the sea of divine essence-fused light that had gathered at the top of the cave had indeed disappeared. If not, how could those people on the divine essence-fused mountain be safe? Yueha and the others were still nowhere to be seen, so they were probably still searching for divine essence-fused stones. Yang Kai wasn't in a hurry though. Looking around, he flew over to one of the stone pillars. The top of this stone pillar was a smooth stone surface, enough for several dozen people to stand on. It was only a few dozen meters away from the cave entrance. From time to time, people would fly down from the cave entrance. Obviously, they were all cultivators who had heard the news and wanted to get a share of the loot. When these people saw Yang Kai sitting alone on the stone pillar, they couldn't help but be a little surprised. However, no one thought too much about it. In the face of benefits, who would have the time to care about the life or death of others? Everyone went in their own direction and searched deeper. After waiting for less than half a day, two ferocious auras descended from the cave above his head. Sensing these familiar auras, Yang Kai opened his eyes and looked over, only to see two behemoths flying down one after the other, constantly circling around Yang Kai, each of their divine senses conveying a hint of flattery. The two ferocious beasts had put in a lot of effort and were injured. The earth dragon was injured by the divine essence-fused light, but it had a strong recovery ability and had more or less recovered in the past few days. The scarlet flood dragon was injured by the thunderlight cultivator. It had chased after the thunderlight cultivator in a rage, and only now did it return. Stop arguing. Yang Kai was a little speechless towards these two fellows. Although they couldn't speak, their divine senses were constantly surging towards him, transmitting some vague information, which was really annoying. Yang Kai had no choice but to throw out 2 dragon blood pills to calm them down, each of them finding a quiet place to lie down and refine the medicinal efficacies. Yang Kai also swallowed a dragon blood pill, and then closed his eyes to comprehend the mysteries of wood and fire in his Tao seal, looking forward to comprehending some kind of divine technique. Another day later, Yu He and the others returned, all of them smiling from ear to ear. Obviously, their harvest was not small. Sensing Yang Kai's aura, Yu He's eyes lit up and she led everyone to the stone pillar, handing over a space ring. "Young master, this is all of our harvest." Yang Kai glanced at her with some surprise, not having expected her to hand over all of her harvest to him. Yu He, on the other hand, smiled as if this was only natural. Yang Kai received the space ring and poured his divine sense into it to investigate, his expectations quickly turning into disappointment. Chapter 40-22. The harvest of Yu He and the others was indeed not small, at least 30% more than what he had obtained. What's more, they didn't even let go of any divine essence magnet stones below 3rd grade, most likely collecting everything they could find. The remaining 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade stones were everywhere, but there were no 7th grade stones. Seemingly aware of Yang Kai's thoughts, Yu He sent him a message. "This divine essence magnet mountain is so rich, with countless low-rank and mid-rank divine essence magnet stones. It is very likely that there won't be any high-rank divine stones here." What she said made sense, but Yang Kai was obviously unwilling to accept this. Putting away the space rings, Yang Kai turned to Qi Xing and said, "You've done well. After we return, if you have any needs, just ask. Whether it is 5th grade or 6th grade, as long as you have the ability to refine them, this king will not be stingy." These dozen or so survivors were those who had not fled when facing the hundreds of Thunderlight sex cultivators. Regardless of how loyal they were, at the very least, they had some courage. As soon as these words came out, everyone's breathing became heavy, and even Guizian was taken aback. "6th Master, how can this be?" 5th grade and 6th grade precious stones were given out by Yang Kai as soon as he opened his mouth. Although not all of them had the ability to refine 6th grade precious stones, there were still some who could refine 5th grade precious stones. These words alone were enough to show Yang Kai's generosity and courage. What's more, there were only a dozen or so of them, and none of them had contributed much at all this time. When facing the provocation of Thunderlight sex cultivators, it was Yang Kai who had single-handedly dealt with them. All in all, they were only able to survive thanks to Yang Kai's protection. Following Yang Kai to this underground cave was simply a matter of finding some precious stones. If it weren't for Yang Kai pushing his earth attribute before, they wouldn't have been able to descend at all. Putting in a little effort, reaping great benefits, this was something they never dared to imagine before. The harvest this time is not small, and this king is not a person who likes to eat alone. Since you are this king's people, this king naturally hopes that you can grow up quickly, so that you can share this king's burdens in the future. Seeing Guizian still wanting to say something, Yang Kai raised his hand and said, "It's decided. There is no need to say anything more." Guizian sighed and cupped his fists. "Sixth Master, this lowly one, thank you, Sixth Master. The dozen or so gold precious treasured stones, precious stones." Everyone stared at Yang Kai with fiery eyes, once again feeling that it was a blessing to follow such a master. If it had been the old poison matriarch here, how could she have been so generous? But then again, even with the poison woman's ability, it was unlikely she could achieve what Yang Kai had. Yang Kai continued, "Some of you may have already condensed the power of different attributes, so you should already have a plan for your future. However, this king would like to give you a piece of advice. Regardless of whether you have condensed the yin-yang 5 elements or not, you should still try your best to condense high-quality materials. Although laying down a foundation won't help you reach a higher realm, in a battle, high-quality energy may be the difference between life and death. For example, if a cultivator had condensed the 3rd grade fire attribute power before, then his position would be at the 3rd grade sky splitter. If it were in the outside world, without sufficient financial resources and opportunities, he would only look for 3rd grade materials to condense the remaining power. But here in the great cosmological realm, if he chose to condense the 4th grade or 5th grade origin magnet divine force, although it could not help him advance to the 4th grade or 5th grade sky splitter, he would still only reach the 3rd grade. However, he would be able to get more help and more damage when urging the metal attribute power. Guizian said, "Sixth Master is right." A Crimson Star disciple stood up and said, "Sixth Master, I only want the 4th grade." "I also only want the 4th grade," another person said. The rest of the group also spoke out their needs. Basically, they were all 4th grade. Only 2 people pondered for a long time before saying that they needed the 5th grade. In this world, there were many cultivators who were limited by financial resources and did not reach the limit of the Sky Splitter grade. For example, Meng Hong. He had condensed the 3rd grade Sky Splitter power before, but his limit was the 5th grade. It was just that a force like the Great Moon Province could not meet his needs at all. There were also people who were burdened by their aptitude and could not bear the pressure of condensing high-quality Sky Splitter power. Forcibly condensing it would only be counterproductive. Generally speaking, as long as one's aptitude was not too bad, condensing 4th grade materials was not a problem. If one's aptitude was slightly better, there was hope for the 5th grade. As for the 6th grade, it really required an excellent foundation and aptitude. Nearly 10 people out of the dozen or so people stated their requirements, leaving only a few people who looked on enviously. They had already condensed the metal attribute power, so this origin magnet divine stone was naturally of no use to them. Yang Kai said again, "If you have other gains in the future, just tell me if you need anything. This king will not treat you unfairly." Everyone was overjoyed and cupped their hands to thank him. Guizian was happy to surrender. This new 6th Master was so powerful and so generous to his subordinates. It was really rare in the world. It was their fortune to have such a superior. Turning his head to look around, Guizian said, "Sixth Master, there are many treasures underground. Do you want me to take some people to look for them?" "No need. Just wait here. Naturally, someone will come to us." Yang Kai waved his hand. Guizian was stunned when he heard this. He did not know what Yang Kai meant. He blinked and looked at Yang Kai, then looked at the special position here, and then looked at the cave entrance more than 100 feet away. She said with a look of horror, "You're not going to rob us, are you?" Yang Kai grinned. "This tree was planted by me, and this road was opened by me. If you want to pass through here, leave some money. If anyone dares to say no, I'll kill them." He was speechless. Qi Xing and the others also had black lines on their faces. Sixth Master was really bold. He could even do this kind of thing. However, since Sixth Master had made this decision, They could only obey. They all stood behind Yang Kai to show off their strength. Since the appearance of the origin magnet divine light, although 3 days had passed, there were still people flying down from the cave entrance to explore the underground. No one had left this place, but counting the time, it was about time for some people to leave. Although the underground area was vast, it could not withstand the search of thousands of people for several days. The places that needed to be searched had already been searched. Without any benefits, who would be willing to stay here? Sure enough, in less than half a day, a few rays of light flew over from afar, and soon arrived in front of them, preparing to fly out through the passage they came in. However, how could Guizian, who had long known Yang Kai's intentions, give them this opportunity? He immediately stepped forward and raised his hand. Halt! The newcomers paused, and when the light faded, the figures of 6 people were revealed. An elderly man and 5 young men and women. Judging from their appearances, they should be from the same great force. Yang Kai guessed that they had been drawn into the great cosmological realm by the great cosmological fog while working in Star City. All 6 of them looked vigilant as they secretly circulated their strength. However, when the old man saw Guizian's appearance, he could not help but be shocked. He quickly looked towards Yang Kai and found that it was indeed this god of death. He smiled bitterly in his heart. He had witnessed the scene of this young man killing Liao Yibai before, and knew that the 6 of them were not his opponent. If it was a blessing, it would not be a disaster. If it was a disaster, it could not be avoided. The elderly man cupped his fists and said, "So it is Lord Yang. This old master has been disrespectful. What advice does Lord Yang have for us?" Yang Kai, who was sitting cross-legged on the stone pillar, opened his eyes, looked at the elderly man and said, "I dare not give advice, but please show me your space rings." As soon as this statement came out, the elderly man's face changed, and a young man behind him shouted angrily, "Why should we?" No cultivator was willing to hand over their space ring to others to check. Everyone's space ring had its own privacy. If others were to check it at will, wouldn't it be exposed? Another young girl gritted her teeth and said, "Wishful thinking." The elderly man raised his hand to stop her, looked at Yang Kai, and forced a smile. "Lord Yang, although this old master and these unfilial disciples have searched underground for several days, we have not found anything good. Even if we hand over our space rings, I am afraid it will only disappoint Lord Yang." Yang Kai said lightly, "Whether you will be disappointed or not, you will know at a glance." The elderly man frowned and said, "Lord Yang, how about this? We will give 30% of our harvest to Master, and ask Master to let us pass. How does that sound?" "Martial uncle." The young men and women behind him couldn't help shouting. Their harvest this time wasn't that great to begin with, so if they had to hand over 30%, it would be as painful as cutting their own flesh. How could they be willing? "I will only look at your space rings." Yang Kai slowly shook his head. The elderly man's brow furrowed even more, hesitating for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, 40%. Yang Kai turned a deaf ear to this. 50%. The elderly man took a step forward, seemingly having made a great decision. If Lord Yang is still not satisfied, then this old master has nothing to say. Yang Kai still said the same words. "I will only look at your space rings." The young man who spoke before shouted angrily, "Don't go too far." Yang Kai coldly glanced over. "If I wanted to go too far, you would all be corpses by now. How could I allow you to be so noisy?" Hearing this, the young man's face paled, and he couldn't help taking a few steps back. Thinking back to how Yang Kai had killed a heaven-opening realm master, he felt that the few of them here wouldn't be enough to kill him. The elderly man smiled bitterly. "Is Lord Yang so insistent?" Yang Kai remained silent. The elderly man nodded. "This old master understands. Sorry for disturbing master." After cupping his fists, he waved his hand and said, "Let's go." Leading his disciples in another direction, it seemed that they wanted to look for another exit. Originally, they were still a little worried that Yang Kai would stop them, but who would have thought that even after they had walked far away, Yang Kai didn't seem to have any intention of doing so. "That person went too far," the young woman said indignantly. The elderly man said, Now you should understand that in these 3,000 worlds, strength is respected. Cultivate well in the future, don't be distracted. The disciples blushed with shame and nodded. On the other side, Yuhi said, aren't you afraid that they will find another exit or forcefully open one of their own? If they can do it, it'll be up to them, Yang Kai said indifferently. Chapter 40:23. This place was 3,000 meters underground, and because of the origin magnet mountain, the ground was extremely hard. In the great cosmological realm, under the premise that heaven-opening realm cultivators could not display too much power, it was impossible for anyone to forcefully open an exit. Even if Yang Kai went on the field himself, unless he used the black dragon spear, he would not have a chance. Only the earth dragon, who was naturally good at digging holes, was able to directly drill a passage into the origin magnet mountain. Time passed slowly, and people constantly flew over from all directions, wanting to leave through the passage, but without exception, they were all stopped by Guizian. At the entrance of the passage, more and more people gathered, and in less than half a day, there were already several hundred people. Yang Kai sat on the stone pillar calmly, and the several hundred people below were noisy and indignant. Many people looked at Yang Kai with hatred, but none of them dared to provoke him, only cursing him in their hearts. As time passed, more and more people gathered here, but they did not know what was going on. After asking around, they learned that the sixth manager of the Crimson Star sect actually wanted to bribe people to pass through, and he even shamelessly said that he wanted to check the space ring of a passing cultivator. No one would agree to such a rude request. After all, what if they handed the space ring to Yang Kai, and Yang Kai snatched it away? They definitely could not defeat him, nor could they snatch it back. So although there were many people gathered here, no one could leave. Hui was also here, and besides him, there were several other heaven-opening realm cultivators. Everyone looked at them, hoping that they could uphold justice. Hui did not want to be the first to stand out, and he wished he could shrink back into the crowd. But with so many people looking at him, he had no choice but to stand out. After all, if a heaven-opening realm cultivator did not stand out, how could he count on the Emperor realm to speak up? Raising his hand to calm the rioting crowd, Hui said, everyone, please calm down and allow this Hu to inquire about Manager Yang's intentions. Everyone cupped their fists and said, thank you for your trouble, Manager Hu. Hui sighed in his heart, then raised his head to look at the direction Yang Kai was at, then looked at the Crimson WRM, that seemed to be sleeping, but was actually ferocious and monstrous as it lay nearby, and his scalp went numb. He silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva, then flicked his sleeve and flew up the stone pillar. Guizian and the others looked at him coldly, but they did not stop him. Hui climbed up the stone pillar. He first cupped his hands towards Guizian, and then towards Yang Kai. Master Yang. Yang Kai opened his eyes and looked at him. Master Hu, have you figured it out? Since you've figured it out, please give me your space ring. The corners of Hu Yi's mouth twitched, and he forced a smile and said, Headmaster Yang must be joking. This Hu came here just to ask Headmaster Yang, what is the meaning of this action? Yang Kai said indifferently, what do you mean? Hui said, it should be for the origin magnetic divine stone. Since you know, why are you being so long-winded? Hu Yi's face stiffened as he frowned. Although I know, I'm afraid Headmaster Yang's actions are inappropriate. Those origin magnetic divine stones are something everyone worked so hard to find. Who would be willing to hand them over so easily? What's more, Headmaster Yang is blocking this path, and not allowing everyone to pass. There is no reason for him to do so. Yang Kai gave him a thumbs up and pointed upwards. This path was opened by me. Is that reason enough? Hui was stunned for a moment before smiling bitterly. This path was really opened by someone else. There was no way he could refute this. Yang Kai snorted. Without this king's permission, you used the passage opened by this king's subordinate spirit beasts to search for origin magnetic divine stones. This king didn't pursue this matter, but now that I'm asking you to share some benefits, you're making all kinds of excuses. What, do you really think this king is a pushover? We wouldn't dare. Hui hurriedly waved his hand, thinking that if this guy was a pushover, Then there was no one in the great void realm who wasn't. After pondering for a moment, he said, Headmaster Yang's words are reasonable. How about this? You give a number 10%, 20%, or 30%. If everyone has no objections, we'll hand over Headmaster Yang's share and ask Headmaster Yang to let us pass. How much do I say? How do I know what you found? What if you're deliberately deceiving us? Absolutely not. Hui waved his hand. Can you guarantee? Hu Yi's expression stiffened. How could he guarantee this kind of thing? What if someone was really unwilling to pay too much and casually took out some low-quality origin magnetic divine stones to make up the numbers? Don't be long-winded. In short, if you want to leave this place, take out your space rings for this king to check. After checking, this king will naturally let you go. Hui said. Headmaster Yang's move is likely to anger everyone. Yang Kai sneered. It's not like it's the first time. Hui shook his head and said, that was then and this is now. Previously, the people's hearts were not united, but now, everyone wants to leave. If Manager Yang insists on stopping them, these hundreds and thousands of people will rush over. May I ask if Manager Yang can stop them? Not to mention, there are still many people who haven't arrived yet. Yang Kai raised his hand and took out the good wish bag, grinning. Does this king need to stop them? Whoever dares to barge in, have a taste of the power of this king's origin magnetic divine light. Hu Yi's face turned pale as he remembered that this guy had collected a lot of origin magnetic divine light before. If he was provoked, he only needed to block the entrance and release the origin magnetic divine light. No matter how many people there were, they wouldn't be enough for him to kill. Cupping his fists, he retreated from the stone pillar. The two did not deliberately suppress their voices, so how could the hundreds and thousands of people below not hear them? For a time, many people were filled with righteous indignation, thinking that Yang Kai had gone too far. This passage was indeed opened by his spirit beast, but with so many treasures below, it was only natural that everyone who saw them should have a share. Now he was blocking the entrance to the passage and robbing them. He was simply shameless to the extreme. However, not everyone thought so. Some cultivator were considering whether or not to agree to Yang Kai's request. In any case, they didn't have many good things in their space rings, so he might not be interested in them. This time, they didn't harvest many origin magnetic divine stones. So although it was painful to share some, it was better than being blocked here. At that moment, a series of whooshing sounds broke through the air. Everyone turned their heads and saw a dozen or so people drenched in blood rushing over, not even bothering to look back as they headed straight for the passage. Guozian immediately took out his staff and flew to block the entrance of the passageway. Halt! The dozen or so people obviously recognized Guozian and quickly stopped, the leader cupping his fists and asking, What advice does Master have for us? Guozian repeated the same words countless times. If you want to leave, hand over your space rings and let 6th young master inspect them first. Unsurprisingly, the dozen or so people couldn't help showing angry expressions when they heard this. Just as they were hesitating though, Yang Kai calmly said, There are still 10 breaths of time before the people who want to kill you catch up. Either hand over your space rings, and this king will let you go, or continue to flee. The face of the leader of this group changed greatly as he turned his head to look back. Sure enough, he saw a group of lights rapidly approaching them. His mind racing, he quickly asked, Sir, does everyone who wants to leave this place have to hand over their space rings? Yang Kai pointed down. Those who haven't are over there. The man looked down and discovered that there were nearly 1,000 people gathered below. Between life and death, this person decisively nodded. Good, in that case, master, please inspect them. Saying so, he took off his space ring and tossed it to Yang Kai. Seeing their leader act this way, the dozen or so people behind him also took off their space rings with different expressions. Yang Kai's speed was very fast, and under everyone's gazes, his divine sense swept through the dozen or so space rings before he raised his hand and returned them all. Waving his hand, Let's go! The leader of the cultivators was startled, but he didn't have time to think about it, and cupped his fists towards Yang Kai. Many thanks, master. Saying so, He let the dozen or so people behind him out of the passage, disappearing without a trace. 3 breaths after they left, they saw several dozen people chasing after them. Seeing the group from before pass through the passage, these people didn't hesitate to give chase, shouting, "Where do you think you're going?" However, before they could approach the passage, the scarlet flood dragon that had been napping on the ground suddenly flew up, its massive body directly blocking the passage and spitting out a mouthful of raging flames, scaring the several dozen cultivators, so much that they staggered back, their faces ashen. Everyone below was also shocked. From the looks of it, if Yang Kai really didn't want to let them go, he didn't even need to use the divine essence fused light. Just the scarlet flood dragon alone was enough to seal the passage. For a moment, their mouths were filled with bitterness. The leader of the pursuers looked at the scarlet flood dragon and couldn't help but gulp, then turned to Yang Kai and said, "Lord Yang, we are Tion's people." Yang Kai didn't even look at him. "Call Dingyi over to talk to me." That person's expression froze, not understanding how Yang Kai was related to those people who escaped before, and why Yang Kai wanted to protect them. However, he didn't dare to act rashly, quickly taking out his communication bead and sending a message to Dingyi. While he was busy here, the people below suddenly started communicating with their divine senses. Just now, when Yang Kai checked the space rings of the dozen or so people, they clearly saw that Yang Kai really only checked them and didn't touch anything before letting them go. It was impossible to say that those people didn't find anything underground. There were so many divine essence fused stones here. Even if 1 or 2 of them didn't find anything, how could a dozen or so people not find anything? At the very least, they could find some divine essence fused stones below the 3rd grade. However, Yang Kai really didn't take anything. What kind of situation was this? If that was the case, they might be able to accept Yang Kai's conditions. In any case, they wouldn't suffer any losses, at most losing some face. As such, after a brief hesitation, someone immediately flew up and cupped his fists in front of the stone pillar. "Lord Yang." After saying so, he cupped his space ring and handed it over. Yang Kai reached out and grabbed the ring, sweeping it with his divine sense before throwing it back. That person was overjoyed. "Farewell." Saying so, he directly rushed up. The scarlet flood dragon made way for him, and that person quickly disappeared without a trace. This scene caused many people to go into an uproar. If there was a possibility that they had seen wrongly before, then this time, everyone stared very carefully, not daring to be distracted. From what they could see, Yang Kai really didn't take anything. Chapter 40-24. With the first there was a second. One after another, cultivators flew up to the stone pillar and handed over their space rings to Yang Kai. But Yang Kai simply glanced over them and returned them as they were. After inspecting the cultivator, he happily left. After just a stick of incense worth of time, more than 100 people had left, but in front of everyone's eyes, Yang Kai did not take anything from the space rings of these people. Hu Yi and the other heaven-opening boundary masters gathered together, not understanding what was going on. Previously, everyone had thought that Yang Kai wanted to take a share of their harvest, and he had even said so himself. But now he was not taking anything. What did he mean by this? Was he looking down on these people's harvests, or was he looking for something else? Regardless, Yang Kai's actions were good news for most people. Another person flew up the stone pillar. This person had a fawning smile on his face, and was quite ugly, with a sharp mouth and monkey cheeks. At first glance, one could tell he was not a good person. Just like the others, he offered up his space ring with both hands, and waited anxiously. Yang Kai squeezed the space ring and looked at him with a smile. "Is it all here?" The man hurriedly said, "It's all here." "Are you sure?" The man hesitated for a moment before quickly calming down and nodding. "I dare not lie." Yang Kai coldly snorted, and reached out to grab him. A space ring suddenly flew out from the man's sleeve, and fell into Yang Kai's hand. "What is this?" Yang Kai looked at him coldly. The man's expression suddenly became flustered. He had clearly used a secret technique to hide this space ring, but it had still been found so easily. "Master, please spare me." This servant was just confused for a moment. Yang Kai did not even look at him, and simply waved his hand, scram. Under the sweeping force, this person was directly swept into the passage. As for that person's space ring, it was left behind. Standing at the entrance of the passage, the man stared blankly at the space ring that had been taken away, his heart aching. Weighing his own strength, he finally gritted his teeth and flew out. Looking around, Yang Kai said, "If anyone dares to hide anything, I won't kill you." That's what happened to that person. Everyone's expression turned cold. Originally, there were some people like that person who thought they had found something good and wanted to secretly hide it. Seeing this situation, how could they have the guts to do so? Yang Kai had indeed not killed that person, but he had taken away all his belongings. How was he going to survive in the great cosmological realm in the future? Time passed slowly. One by one, the cultivator landed in front of Yang Kai and flew away one by one. Previously on the mountain peak, there were at least 2,000 people, including those from the Dtion heavens. Later on, there were even more cultivators here, so there were at least 2,000 to 3,000 cultivators gathered in the depths of the mountain. Even though Yang Kai's speed wasn't slow, it still took him a long time to complete his investigation. However, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Yang Kai searched through the space rings of hundreds of people, but did not take anything, except for the space ring of the one who had just been stolen. Hu Yi and the other heaven-opening realms were constantly communicating with their divine senses. At a certain moment, Hu Yi suddenly turned to a cultivator beside him and sent a divine sense transmission. "You go." The cultivator nodded and flew forward. After waiting in line for half an incense stick's worth of time, it was finally his turn. After handing over his space ring, the cultivator waited anxiously, but after Yang Kai finished inspecting his space ring, he actually smiled faintly. Not bad. He casually tossed the space ring back. The cultivator was slightly startled before cupping his fists in joy. "Many thanks, Master." There were 2 sets of divine origin magnet stones in his space ring. He was worried that Yang Kai would take them away, but now it seemed that he had been overthinking. Turning around, he gave Hui a look that said everything was going well. Hui nodded slightly. "If it's a blessing, it's not a curse. If it's a curse, it can't be avoided. Let's go," Hui said. Although it was shameful to have their space rings inspected by someone from the Emperor realm, in this situation, they had no choice but to lower their heads. If they wanted to leave this place, they would have to rely on Yang Kai's aura. Yang Kai had 2 strange beasts and controlled the divine origin magnet light. With him blocking the entrance to the passage, they could not resist. The heaven-opening realms were also a little impatient from waiting and nodded in agreement. Immediately, the heaven-opening realms led their disciples to the entrance of the passage. After about the time it would take to brew a cup of tea, it was finally Hu Yi's turn. After handing over his space ring, Hu Yi waited silently. However, this time, Yang Kai finally acted differently. With a single thought, a millstone-sized divine origin magnet stone appeared in front of him and was directly stored in his space ring. Hu Yi's eyes widened as he quickly called out, "Master Yang." The divine origin magnet stone that Yang Kai had taken away was a 6th grade divine origin magnet stone, and it was the only 6th grade divine origin magnet stone Hui had obtained on this trip. Only now did Hui understand that Yang Kai had not taken anything earlier, not because he was being benevolent, but because he did not care about the gains of these people. His eyes were only set on those above the 6th grade. "Do you have a problem with that?" Yang Kai raised his eyes, pinching Hu Yi's space ring in his hand. Hu Yi was so angry that his face twitched for a long time before he gritted his teeth and said, "I don't dare." He was afraid that if he said that, his space ring would be gone. Yang Kai tossed his space ring back to him and calmly said, "Next." Hu Yi caught the space ring. Although he was angry, there was nothing he could do. He could only glare hatefully at Yang Kai before flying towards the passage. When the people behind him saw this, they naturally understood Yang Kai's intentions. This guy wanted to monopolize the 6th grade divine stones. For a moment, some people were happy, while others were sad. At this moment, a figure rushed over from afar and quickly arrived at the stone pillar. revealing Ding Yi's appearance. At first glance, seeing how lively this place was, he could not help but scratch his head and ask, "Brother Yang, what are you doing?" Yang Kai checked the space ring and grinned at him. "I'm blocking the road to rob you." Ding Yi's expression stiffened and he laughed dryly. "Brother Yang, you must be joking." He thought that Yang Kai was joking, but when he looked carefully, he found that many people were waiting in line. When they arrived in front of Yang Kai, they took the initiative to hand over their space rings for him to check and let him pass. He could not help but tremble. If this was not blocking the road to rob him, then what was? For a moment, he looked at Yang Kai with eyes full of admiration. He did not even dare to think about such a thing, but Yang Kai, who was also from the Emperor realm, had done it. Moreover, there were so many people gathered here, and they were all obediently cooperating. For a moment, Yang Kai was shocked. Ding Yi was full of interest, and he said, "Brother Yang, do you need help?" Yang Kai tilted his head and thought for a moment. "All right, I'll tell you to line up behind D Tion's people." Ding Yi was stunned. D Tion's people also need to be checked? Yang Kai said, "No one is an exception." He pointed forward, and Ding Yi looked over and found that that person was at the heaven-opening realm, but his expression was extremely ugly. Ding Yi forced a smile. "No, Brother Yang, I D Tion was on the mountain before. Shichi, I saved many of your people's lives on the mountain." Yang Kai did not wait for him to finish and interrupted him. Ding Yi smacked his lips. What he said was true. If Yang Kai did not release the divine essence-fused light at the crucial moment, Sword Pavilion's sword formation would not have been destroyed. In the end, both sides would have suffered great losses. Even if D Tion's people could take down Sword Pavilion, they would have to pay a huge price. "Brother Yang, do we really have to do this?" Ding Yi asked with a frown. "Don't worry, I won't touch what I shouldn't take. I will only take what is useful." Yang Kai comforted him. Ding Yi stood in place and hesitated for a long time. Then, as if he had made up his mind, he gritted his teeth and said, "All right, Brother Yang, just say the word, and I, Ding Yi, will cooperate with you." After saying this, he turned around and flew down, ordering D Tion and the others to line up behind. One cultivator after another was checked, and their spatial rings were released. Yang Kai's intentions were completely exposed. Even if those cultivators obtained grade 5 divine stones, he would not touch them. Only the grade 6 divine stones were kept. Yang Kai had his own considerations. There were many grade 5 divine stones in the depths of the ground. If he really kept all of them, it would be a little too much. If he ate the meat, others should at least get some soup. If he really did that, he would probably incur the wrath of everyone, and a huge battle with these thousands of people would break out. When that time came, blood would flow like rivers. As for the grade 6 divine stones, he definitely could not let them go. Even if he did not need them, there would be a time when he would need them in the future. As such, the cultivator who did not obtain any grade 6 divine stones were overjoyed, while the cultivator who did had a grade 6 divine stone was frowning. What was more, in the end, those cultivator took the initiative to take out the grade 6 divine stones, so that Yang Kai would not have to snatch them himself. However, there were only a few grade 6 divine stones. Yang Kai had checked more than 1,000 cultivators, and he had only found a few pieces. After Ding Yi made arrangements for D Tion and the others, he flew up to the stone pillar and watched anxiously as Yang Kai checked one spatial ring after another. He sighed in his heart. If only he could be as domineering as this, his life would not have been in vain. At this moment, although he was the leader of D Tion and had thousands of subordinates, he still felt that something was lacking when compared to Yang Kai. D Tion and the others had arrived later, and could be considered the last batch of people. Chapter 40-25. Half an hour later, within the Origin Magnet Mountain's underground cave, two enormous figures scuttled out like fish. The Scarlet WRM took the lead, and the Earth Dragon followed closely behind. More than 10 figures stood on the Scarlet WRM's enormous head. After dealing with those fellows hiding in the depths of the cave, who wanted to fish in troubled waters, Yang Kai left directly. Ding Yi had also left long ago. Although the divine stones at the foot of the metamagnetic mountain had been plundered clean, it did not mean that there were no more metamagnetic divine stones. The entire metamagnetic mountain stretched for thousands of miles, attracting countless cultivators to explore and search. Even though the abundant underground reserves had been plundered clean, but aside from the underground reserves, the entire essence-fused mountain was filled with opportunities. However, the quality of the divine stones outside was definitely not as good as the ones in the depths. Dingyi led the hundreds of people in the primary magnet mountain. Not only that, he even sent a message back, calling the remaining few thousand people over. They monopolized the mountain range for hundreds of miles, and dug 3 feet into the ground. Flying down, Yongkai sighed slightly. This time, in the end, he still couldn't find a divine origin magnet stone above the 7th grade. The reason why he blocked the way at the entrance of the passage was mainly because of this. Unfortunately, in the end, he still came up empty-handed. He couldn't even find a divine origin magnet stone deep underground. So there probably wasn't much hope above ground. Yuhi observed his expression and knew what he was thinking. She pursed her lips and said, "Isn't the 6th grade good enough? Why are you so insistent?" She seemed to be eager for Yongkai to condense the 6th grade metal element power, adding fuel to the fire all the time. Yongkai could not be bothered with him. He just looked at the dozens of people flying over from afar. When the dozens of people came close, they cupped their hands together and said, "Greetings, 6th Master, 7th Master." As they spoke, their faces were filled with fanaticism. Yongkai looked at Guizian suspiciously. Guizian said, "6th Master, these are the remaining brothers under my command. They were quite far from here before, so they couldn't make it in time. When they arrived, we were already underground, so I made the decision to let them stay on the surface." Yongkai was relieved. After he became Crimson Star's 6th Master, Crimson Star had allocated hundreds of people to him. Previously, only 30 or so people came, and the remaining dozens were only gathered now. Less than 100 people were not worth mentioning, compared to Dtion's thousands of people. However, this was Yongkai's only subordinates now. "What's the situation above?" Guizian looked at one of the young cultivators and asked. The young man stepped forward and cupped his hands. "Great Commander, we have been searching for divine stones in the past few days, but the gains were not very big. The highest grade was only a 3rd grade divine stone." As he spoke, he took out the grade 3 divine origin magnet stone. Guizian turned to look at Yongkai. Guizian understood and said, "Keep it for yourself." She knew that Yongkai had already harvested nearly 20 pieces of 6th grade divine stones. So how could he be interested in a trivial 3rd grade divine stone? The young man was overjoyed. "Thank you, 6th Master." Although he was the one who found it, if Yongkai insisted on taking it, he would have to hand it over with both hands. Now that Yongkai told him to keep it, he was naturally happy. After pondering for a while, Yongkai said, "Commander Gua, take the brothers and stay here. If a high-grade divine stone appears, report it immediately." In the end, he was still a little unwilling to give up. Although the chances were not high. What if someone really found a 7th grade divine stone on this origin magnet mountain? "Yes." Guizian nodded respectfully. "Take this." Yongkai took out a bead and handed it to Guizian. Guizian took it and asked suspiciously, "6th Master, this is?" "Space Spirit Bead." A space spirit bead appeared in Yongkai's hand. "These 2 beads are a pair and have a mysterious connection with each other. Don't put it in your space ring, just carry it with you." Yongkai did not explain in detail. Guizian naturally obeyed, turning his head to look to the side and saying, "But 6th Master, although the several dozen of us here are stronger than some stragglers, in the end there are too few of us. If we really find something good and get into a conflict with others, without 6th Master here, I'm afraid we won't be a match. If you have something to say, then say it." Yongkai glanced at him. Guizian smiled somewhat embarrassedly and pointed to the Scarlet Flood Dragon and Earth Dragon nearby. This humble one would like to ask 6th Master to keep one of them, preferably the Earth Dragon. That way, if the situation turns bad, we can have it dig a hole to make it easier for us to escape. Yongkai laughed. "You're quite the schemer. Fine, I'll leave both of them to you. Guizian was overjoyed. Many thanks, sixth master. With these two strange beasts, he had nothing to fear unless one of the few great forces took action. Are you coming? Yang Kai turned to look at Yuhi. Yuhi pursed her lips and smiled. Wherever young master goes, I will naturally follow. Yang Kai rolled his eyes and reached out to grab her arm. With a move of his divine sense, he instantly disappeared from the spot. Everyone from the Crimson Star sect was dumbfounded. No one saw how Yang Kai disappeared, but under the perception of their divine sense, they could no longer sense Yang Kai's aura. Space divine technique. Guizian had a look of fascination. With this divine technique, even if the great cosmological abyss was big, there was nowhere he could not go. The youth from before came over with a sneaky look and said in a low voice, Commander, we heard some incredible news earlier, but we don't know if it's true or not. What did you hear? Guizian glanced at him. The youth chuckled. Someone said that our sixth master killed a heaven-opening realm cultivator with a single spear strike. It's said that the heaven-opening realm cultivator was the leader of some mystic cloud association called Liaoyi Bai. The rumors are very vivid. Someone frowned and said, Commander, could it be that someone wants to kill our sixth master by flattery? I've also heard that our sixth manager is very powerful. With his emperor realm strength, he was able to kill the poison matriarch in Ganhong, forcing his way into Crimson Star. However, killing a heaven-opening cultivator in a single move is still a bit unrealistic. Guizian coldly snorted. You think it's unrealistic because you haven't seen it. As soon as this was said, the expressions of the dozens of newcomers shook, and the youth said in surprise, Commander, that news can't be true, right? Guizian said. This commander saw the sixth master's peerless divine might with his own eyes. How can it be false? There was a burst of gasps as the dozens of people did not dare to believe it, but Guizian said it with certainty. So how could it be that he was joking? Guizian looked disappointed. Although this commander is a second-stage heaven-opening realm cultivator, in the great cosmological abyss, the sixth master can probably crush me with a finger. The corner of the youth's mouth twitched. Commander is too modest. Guizian slowly shook his head. You've only heard about the sixth master killing Liaoyi Bai with a single spear strike, but you don't know that before that, our sixth master killed hundreds of people in Thunderlight sect, and even Bi Jian died at his hands. Everyone was dumbfounded, and looked at Guizian seriously, as if they wanted to see if he was joking. On the other hand, the dozen or so people behind Guizian, because they had witnessed the battle with their own eyes, still rejoiced in retrospect. Although Yang Kai had Scarlet Flood Dragon's help at that time, in hindsight, even without Scarlet Flood Dragon, the sixth masters might have been unstoppable. The youth muttered. So the matter of the sixth master blocking the road and robbing thousands of people lowering their heads is also true? Because not many people had seen the battle with Thunderlight sect, there was little news that spread. But Yang Kai killing Liaoyi Bai with a single spear strike and blocking the road at the entrance of the underground passage were all witnessed by thousands of people. Our sixth master is an incredible figure. To be able to follow him is our luck. After Guizian finished speaking, a cultivator behind him said excitedly, and he's also very generous. The sixth master said that as long as we brothers can use the harvest this time, no matter if it's 4th grade, 5th grade, or 6th grade, we can ask him for it, and it will be the same in the future. 5th grade or 6th grade. Is that true? Some people didn't dare to believe it. A 5th grade was worth 1.5 million, and a 6th grade was worth 15 million. These kinds of things could be casually given away. To what extent was the sixth master so generous? Guizian chuckled. Whether it's true or not, you'll know when we return this time, but I don't think the sixth master will go back on his words. Clapping his hands, his expression turned solemn. All right, let's not be long-winded, hurry up and get busy. Maybe we can even find some high-quality divine origin magnet stones. After saying that, Guizian went straight to the Earth Dragons. The Earth Dragons were experts in digging holes, so although they had fewer people, if they used the Earth Dragons well, their harvests might not be worse than others. Star City, Yang Kai's mansion. In the side room, when a figure flashed by, Yang Kai and Yuhi had already appeared here. Yuhi was stunned. She turned her head to look around and hesitated. This is Star City? She more or less had some impression of Yang Kai. Yes. Yang Kai pushed the door open and walked out. Yuhi followed closely behind and cried out involuntarily. You can teleport tens of thousands of miles? The Divine Origin Magnet Mountain was tens of thousands of miles away from here. In just a breath's time, Yang Kai actually brought her back from the Divine Origin Magnet Mountain. Even though Yuhi was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be shocked. The Space Divine technique, was it really so powerful? If that was the case, then who in this world could kill Kai Yang? Unless heaven and earth were sealed, he could teleport tens of thousands of miles, and no one could catch up to him. My abilities are beyond your imagination. Yang Kai sneered. He didn't tell her that he was using the Space Spirit Bead. Before leaving, Yang Kai had already left a Space Spirit Bead in his bedroom, so he could come and go as he pleased. Yuhi said bitterly. Then why didn't you teleport to the Divine Origin Magnet Mountain before? Previously, they had to travel a long distance to get there. I've never been to the Divine Origin Magnet Mountain, so how could I locate it? Yang Kai casually replied. Yuhi thought about it and agreed. It was indeed not easy to teleport to a place where one had never been before. If something went wrong, it would be no joke. As the two of them talked, they had already arrived in front of the secret chamber. The two disciples from the Great Moon State were standing in front of the secret chamber, waiting anxiously. When they saw Yang Kai, they immediately greeted him. Brother Yang, how's the situation? Yang Kai asked. Before he left, Meng Hong was refining the rank 5 True Sun Flame. Now that a few days had passed, he didn't know how it was going, or whether it was going smoothly. Chapter 40-26. The two disciples of the Great Moon State slowly shook their heads, looking worried. They couldn't help but worry. Meng Hong was condensing the 5th grade True Sun Fire this time, and if there was a slight mistake, he would be consigned to eternal damnation. They hated Chinyu even more. If it weren't for this woman, how could Big Brother have suffered such a blow? and take such a risk? It won't be so fast. Yuhi said. It's only been a few days, how can there be results? The speed of condensing the power of yin and yang, and the 5 elements, has a lot to do with one's aptitude. The shortest time is 10 days to half a month, and the longest time is a year. You have condensed it yourself, so you should have experience. Speaking of this, Yuhi's beautiful eyes suddenly shrank, as if she had thought of something, and looked at Yang Kai in horror. In Crouching Dragon Mountain, Yang Kai only spent about 20 days to condense the 7th grade earth elemental power. This speed was simply terrifying. When she condensed the 5th grade earth elemental power, which time was less than half a month, the longest time it took her was 3 months. Condensing the 7th grade earth elemental power in 20 days. How terrifying was this guy's aptitude and foundation? Yang Kai didn't notice her thoughts. Thinking about the scene when he condensed the 5 elements' elemental power, it seemed to be true. He ordered the 2 disciples of the Great Moon State. Keep an eye on them at all times. If there is anything strange, report to me immediately. Yes, Brother Yang. The 2 disciples of the Great Moon State cupped their hands and replied. When he returned to his room, Yuhi followed him like a shadow. Yang Kai slowly got used to it, and didn't have much scruples about her. He directly counted the harvest of this trip to the Yuanci Mountain. Under the Yuanci Mountain, his own harvest was not small. He didn't collect the divine stones of the 3rd grade and below, only the divine stones of the 3rd grade and above. Among them, there were more than 100 4th grade divine stones, more than 30 5th grade divine stones, and as many as 4 6th grade divine stones. This alone was worth hundreds of millions of heaven-opening pills. Yuhi Guazian and the others gained more. After all, they had more people, so their harvest was about 30% more than Yang Kai's. After that, they robbed people at the entrance of the passageway, and they plundered a total of 17 to 18 6th grade divine origin magnetism stones. This was an extremely terrifying number, and it was enough to make those blessed paradises go crazy. Only in the great cosmological realm would one have such a terrifying harvest. In the outside world, one would not have such an opportunity in the 3,000 universes. All in all, not counting the divine origin magnet stones below the 3rd grade, there were 245 pieces of the 4th grade, 73 pieces of the 5th grade, and 26 pieces of the 6th grade. Even according to the market price, the origin magnetic divine stones placed in front of Yang Kai were worth nearly 600 million heaven-opening pills. However, if they were to be sold, they would definitely fetch a higher price. Getting rich overnight was nothing more than this. Moreover, this kind of heavenly treasure was a hard currency. No matter where it was placed, it would not go unnoticed. Instead, it was a good thing that would cause a great commotion. Young master, you're rich. Yuhi also smiled until her eyes turned into crescents. Yang Kai benefited, and she seemed to be happier than herself. Yang Kai was also in a good mood, and the depression of not finding a 7th grade divine stone was swept away. He laughed and said, "It's just SOSO." Yuhi covered her mouth and giggled. "If young master succeeds in the future, don't forget to be at my beck and call." The news that Yang Kai had killed a 3rd grade heaven-opening expert with the power of an emperor spread like wildfire. Many people were unwilling to believe it. After all, this kind of thing was too bizarre. Even in the great cosmological realm, a heaven-opening expert had the foundation of a heaven-opening expert. How could it be so easy to kill? Moreover, it was done in one move. However, many people had seen it with their own eyes at that time, and the rumors were so vivid that it made people suspicious. There was no smoke without fire. In addition, Yang Kai later robbed people in the cave under the divine origin magnet mountain, relying on the power of the 2 fierce beasts and the power of the divine origin magnet light to force thousands of people to bow their heads and let him plunder them. The name of Yang Kai quickly spread throughout the great cosmological realm and completely entered the field of vision of various large and small forces. It could be said that he became famous overnight. Adding fuel to the fire, almost half of the people in the great cosmological realm knew that the divine origin magnet stones on the divine origin magnet mountain had basically fallen into Yang Kai's pocket, especially the 6th grade ones. Almost none were left. It was said that in the Divine Origin Magnet Mountain, Yang Kai had obtained no less than 100 6th grade Divine Origin Magnet stones, and the 5th grade and 4th grade ones were simply uncountable. Many people had not heard of Yang Kai's name, and after inquiring around, it was easy to find out that Yang Kai was the new 6th master of Crimson Star. For a time, countless gazes were focused on the star market controlled by Crimson Star. Every day, there would be a cultivator coming from all directions. For a time, the star market was filled with people. Around Yang Kai's mansion, in the tea houses and restaurants, pairs of eyes were closely watching from afar. There were even people who came to visit and reported their names one after another when they came to the mansion. The servants guarding the door had never seen such a scene and hurriedly went to report. Unable to find Yang Kai, they could only look for Yuhi. After receiving several waves of people, Yuhi was annoyed. These guys had obviously heard that Yang Kai had obtained so many good things and had hurriedly come to curry favor with him. Each of them boasted about how powerful they were and wanted to join Yang Kai's forces. Those who knew their limits only asked for a 5th grade divine stone, while those who boasted shamelessly asked for a 6th grade divine stone. It was fine if it was just 1 or 2, but there were people coming over every day to spout nonsense. In a fit of anger, Yuhi broke a person's leg and threw him out of the door, which made the mansion much quieter. In a large hall on several chairs there were silhouettes, each of them exuding a profound aura. Other than the elusive Great Master, the other 4 masters of Crimson Star were all present. Chen Tianfei, Madame Qin, Bei Yushan, and the Ouyang brothers. Strictly speaking, there were 5 of them, but the Ouyang brothers had always been together, so they could only be considered as one head. Lady Poison and Gan Hong were killed by Yang Kai in this hall. Although a few days had passed, the smell of blood still lingered in the hall. On a specially made chair, Chen Tianfei sat there like a mountain of meat. The fat on his face piled up together, and even his eyes were covered. Madame Qin gently plucked the strings of the guqin in front of her, and the tinkling sound flowed slowly, as if an invisible hand was brushing past everyone's heart, making them involuntarily relax. Chen Tianfei coughed dryly and said, "The recent changes in the star market, I'm sure everyone has felt it, right?" Bei Yushan said, "Many people have come." "Yes, a lot of people have come." Chen Tianfei chuckled. "They're all here for our 6th head." "I just don't understand. Doesn't this brat understand the principle of not showing off one's wealth?" Ouyang Bing said. "At first I didn't believe the rumors outside, but recently, I've come to believe them. If I had known earlier, I would have gone to the Yuan-Ci mountain to take a look." Chen Tianfei said, "It's too late to regret now. Everything has already gone into his pocket." Ouyang Lai said, "He is the 6th head of Red Star. Since he has gained something, he should hand over a part of it. Why hasn't there been any news after so long?" Chen Tianfei turned his head and looked at him. "Why don't you ask him, head Ouyang?" Ouyang Lai's expression froze. How could he dare to ask such a question? On the day Yang Kai killed Lady Poison and Gan Hong, he had seen it with his own eyes. The 2 of them couldn't even last 10 breaths of time in front of Yang Kai. Even if they joined forces, they wouldn't be a match for Yang Kai. Chen Tianfei spat, cleared his throat, and said, "Let's not talk about 6th head's gains for the time being. He has offended many people in the Yuan-Ci mountain. Head Zhu of Thunderlight sect came to me personally and said that Yang Kai killed 100 to 200 people from Thunderlight sect on the Yuan-Ci mountain. Even Bi Jian died tragically on the spot. He wants Red Star to give them an explanation." "What business do you have here?" the 2nd grade heaven opening cultivator said. "It's like this. My young master is thirsty for talent and heard that the owner of this place is quite strong, so he wants to take him under his command." "That's right." The young man nodded. "In this world, talents are hard to come by. This young master has taken a fancy to your young master. Call him out to see me. As long as he follows this young master, it won't be a problem to bring him into Qing Ming blessed land after we leave the Great Void Realm. He had a proud look on his face, believing that no one would refuse such a condition. Yuhi's expression was extremely strange. Yang Kai was a genius, and now someone wanted to take him under their command? Yuhi had never seen such a boastful person in her life. If it were anyone else who said this, she would have broken their legs and driven them away. But these people in front of her were from Qingming Blessed Land, so Yuhi could not make a move. Otherwise, it would be causing trouble for Yang Kai, and it would be a disaster outside the Great Void Realm. Chapter 40:28. My young master is currently in retreat. Why don't you all go back first and wait for young master to come out? Yuhi inquired. The young man replied, just call him out. I'm afraid it won't be convenient. Yuhi slowly shook her head. The young man looked annoyed. What's so inconvenient about it? This young master coming to see him in person is his honor. How dare he not give me face? Yuhi sneered lightly, and gradually lost her patience. She was afraid of the azure darkness paradise, and not this profligate young master before her. So how could she possibly take his threat seriously? This fellow had spoken rudely time and time again. And if he really infuriated her, then what harm would there be in bashing him up? The guard who spoke before leaned forward, and whispered a few words in the young man's ear. The young man frowned, and his face became gloomy for a while before he said with a displeased expression, Fine. This young master will be staying in the largest inn here. If your young master comes out of seclusion later, call him to come see me. Yuhi nodded lightly. Okay. The young man glanced at Yuhi again, slowly shook his head, sighed, and left with his people. Yuhi turned her head, looked not far away, and said with a smile, Is Master Chen here? Chen Tianfei was standing not far away, and did not hide his whereabouts, so Yuhi naturally could see him. The fat on his face piled up and his eyes narrowed into slits as he moved his obese body to the front of the mansion, cupped his fists and greeted, Seventh Master. Turning his head to look in the direction of the young man, he asked, Who is this? Yuhi replied, He said he's from Qingming Blessed Land, but who knows if he's telling the truth. Chen Tianfei nodded. A mere Emperor Realm Master can have 2 heaven splitters as guards. Even if he's not from Qingming Blessed Land, I'm afraid his background is not small. What are they doing here? Yuhi covered her mouth and giggled. They said they took a fancy to my young master, and wanted to take him under their wing. Don't you think it's funny? Chen Tianfei chuckled. They're really overestimating themselves. How could a freak like Yang Kai submit to others, especially in the Great Void Boundary? Having seen his power with his own eyes, Chen Tianfei felt that no one in the Great Void Boundary was his opponent, unless they outnumbered him, or arranged a spirit array in advance. Changing the topic, Chen Tianfei asked, Where is the 6th head? Headmaster Chen also came to look for young master? Yuhi had a regretful expression on her face. That's really unfortunate. Young master is currently in closed-door cultivation. Chen Tianfei was taken aback. He wondered why Yang Kai was in seclusion, when he had just returned from Origin Magnet Mountain. He nodded and said, Then it's the same to tell 7th boss. Yuhi said, Come in and talk. After all, they were all from Crimson Star, and it was not appropriate to keep them outside. Moreover, Yuhi also wanted to know Chen Tianfei's intentions for coming here. After inviting him into the guest hall, Chen Yu served him tea. Chen Tianfei did not beat around the bush, and went straight to the point. It was nothing more than Yang Kai causing trouble in Yuanci Mountain, which put a lot of pressure on Qi Xing. Lei Guang had already sent people to condemn Qi Xing, and demanded an explanation. Otherwise they would do this and that. He also explained in detail to Yuhi how terrifying Sword Pavilion was. In short, he wanted Yang Kai to be more restrained when he went out in the future. Since he was Qi Xing's 6th head, he should consider things from Qi Xing's perspective. Yuhi naturally feigned civility, and said that she would pass on Yang Kai's words after he came out of seclusion. Since he could not see Yang Kai, Chen Tianfei had no choice but to take his leave. Although the disciples of the Divine Cauldron Heaven had extraordinary foundations, He was still a 5th grade splitting heaven stone. So keeping an eye on him was not a problem. With a few words from Yang Kai, He obediently stood guard in front of the secret chamber, and she had no complaints or regrets. Although she was very curious about what Su Jin was doing inside, and what he had discussed with Yang Kai, the secret chamber was protected by a formation, so she did not dare to casually disturb it. Suddenly, 10 days later, everything was calm and peaceful. Chen Tianfei had been living quite comfortably these past few days. The Crimson Star originally had 7 heads, but the Poison Lady and Gan Hong had been killed by Yang Kai. Although Yang Kai and He had immediately replaced them, the two of them did not seem to care much about the matters of the Crimson Star, and only cared about themselves. The remaining Bei Yushan had brute force but no brains. Madame Qin did not care about worldly affairs, and only cared about music. The Ouyang brothers were smart and capable, but unfortunately, they often went into seclusion. Now that the great leader did not come out, the entire Crimson Star could be said to be under Chen Tianfei's control. He was not the great leader, but he was better than the great leader. With great power in his hands, he naturally felt good. Chapter 40-31. You're right, elder sister. Zhao Xingxing nodded again and again, his drunkenness instantly dissipating as his eyes lit up. Then what does brother-in-law mean? The woman shook her head. I don't know what your brother-in-law means. He didn't say anything before leaving. What's more, a woman like me can't care so much. I only know that Qi Xing won't abandon his foundation for a single person. Zhao Xingxing clapped his hands. I understand. Turning his head to look in the direction of Yang Kai's mansion, he grinned sinisterly. Surnamed Yang. Let's see if you die now. It was as if he could already see the scene of Thunderlight Sect and Sword Pavilion cutting Yang Kai into pieces. At this moment, after experiencing the initial tranquility, Star City was once again in turmoil. Although there were Crimson Star disciples to maintain order, how could they manage everything? Everywhere in Star City, there was an endless clamor. Everyone was clamoring for Crimson Star to open up the great defensive array and let the scattered cultivators leave. Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect's 3,000 people were shrouded in darkness. If they really fought, the entire star market would be affected. At that time, wouldn't they suffer an unexpected calamity? But how could Qi Xing open the protective array so easily? Before thoroughly understanding Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect's intentions, rashly opening the protective array was tantamount to suicide. This protective array was Qi Xing's last line of defense. Within the discussion hall, Chen Tianfei and the other leaders were all badly battered, whereas Madame Qin, who'd always been calm and composed, had lost the interest to play the zither at this moment. Her beautiful brows were knit together tightly as she sat there, and she seemed like a resentful wife that had been abandoned by her husband for many years. The entire hall could be described as a gloomy atmosphere. What should we do now? What do you all think? Chen Tianfei turned to look at the others. Bei Yushan's face was filled with anger. This Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect don't put my Crimson Star in their eyes. I suggest we gather all the disciples and fight them to the death. Let them know that my Crimson Star is not easy to bully. Fuck your mother's bullshit. Chen Tianfei couldn't hold back and cursed. Sometimes, he really wanted to smash open this guy's head and see what he was thinking. Why was his way of thinking so different? Ouyang Lai frowned. What did First Head say? Chen Tianfei slowly shook his head. I have already sent a message to First Head, but I don't know if he is at a critical juncture in seclusion or not. Ouyang Lai couldn't help but frown. At this time, if the Great Master didn't appear, it would be very difficult for them. Ouyang Bing said. It could also be that the First Master feels that this matter isn't the right time to decide the fate of Crimson Star. After all, it wasn't Crimson Star that provoked Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect, but that guy. Chen Tianfei said. That may be the case, but he is the 6th head of the Crimson Star. His words and actions represent the Crimson Star. Whatever he does outside is already marked by the Crimson Star. Ouyang Bing said. No matter what, we still need to figure out the intentions of Sword Pavilion and Lei Guang before we make any plans. And, calm. His voice was like the roar of a dragon or a tiger. Although it was not loud, it was deafening. Everyone in the star market could hear it clearly. This was trying to be polite before resorting to force. Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect had joined forces, a total of 3,000 people. If they really wanted to forcefully attack this star market, then even the defensive spirit array would be useless. Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect's 3,000 people besieged Star City. Although they didn't do anything and didn't say a word, it made the people in Star City feel uneasy. Amidst this turbulent situation, a piece of news quickly spread through Star City. Yang Kai didn't obtain the position of Crimson Star's 6th head legitimately. He didn't obtain the first head's approval at all. He had seized the position through schemes and tricks. On that day, he had ambushed Poison Matriarch and Gan Hong, and used despicable means to coerce Chen Tianfei and the others to take the position of 6th head. The first head, who was in seclusion, didn't know anything about this and had never acknowledged his identity as the 6th head. His words and actions didn't represent Crimson Star at all. Chapter 4032. In other words, this so-called 6th young master of Qi Xing was just Yang Kai blowing his own trumpet and had never been recognized by Qi Xing. At first, this news was only spread among a few people, but it soon spread to the entire Star City. It had only been half an hour, so it was impossible to say that there was no one behind this. For a time, many people looked at Yang Kai's mansion with pity, knowing that this 6th young master had been abandoned by Qi Xing. Not many people believed this rumor. If this was true, why did Qi Xing not deny it before? Why did he release such a statement when Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect's army was pressing in? Obviously, he didn't want to be implicated by Yang Kai. This was understandable. It was a wise move to abandon the rook to save the king. What's more, Yang Kai had only been the 6th young master for a few days. He didn't even have a foundation in Qi Xing, so who would protect his interests and safety at this time? Although they understood, at this time, no one stood up for an irrelevant person. Zheng Fan's original plan was to kill Yang Kai's subordinates if he hadn't one by one in front of Yang Kai, and the entire Star City before killing wouldn't have made such a big fuss. Firstly, it was to pay for the deaths of Sword Pavilion's disciples on Yuan. They didn't know if Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect would force their way in, on Yang Kai. And what would happen otherwise to them if that happened? Why would he have spent so much effort to bring these people and Qi Jiao here? Some people had even gathered in front of Yang Kai's mansion, shouting that Yang Kai should get out of Star City, that he was no longer a member of Scarlet Star. Did not welcome him. Many of these people had gone through life and death with him. The number of people was not many. If Yang Kai really left them alone, he would definitely be gathered in front of Yang Kai's mansion. If this move could force Yang Kai out, a stick of incense it would naturally be for the best. Hundreds of people had gathered here, succeed, and as time passed, more people lose anything. All of them glared at the world and know what the consequences all of them wanted Yang Kai to leave this place quickly, killing two birds with one stone. With Sword Pavilion, Zheng Fan had thought that Yang Kai would be afraid of death and turn a blind eye. They didn't want to implicate innocent people, or that he would be angered by his subordinates. The voices were like a tide, but who would have thought that such a sudden change would occur? When Yang Kai's figure disappeared from his field of Great Moon Province, Zheng Fan's heart skipped a beat, pale and trembled. He instinctively felt that something was wrong. There was still a chance of survival if they hid here. But as soon as he said this, how could they survive Yang Kai again? Yuhi's delicate body was also trembling slightly from anger. Beside Guizian she never thought that Qi Xing would actually be so despicable and shameless. As soon as he appeared, to force Yang Kai to leave Star City, Yang Kai, he actually 10 meters away from Guizian method. Lu Shui stood in the air. Her beautiful eyes detect that there were many Crimson Star disciples but in the blink of an eye, fuel to Yang the fire. Kai had disappeared. These people must have received instructions that something was wrong. And it was already too late. Yang Kai's large hand had reached out, seemingly able to cover the sky. The gazes of Zheng towards her, and the other four heaven opening realm masters couldn't avoid in front of Yang Kai's mansion. She was still a fourth stage heaven opening cultivator. This is Qi Xing's plan? The moment she sensed that something was wrong, that Yang Kai she let out a shout, Chen Tianfei, and a purple sword and the others are getting worse and worse from between her eyebrows. Julie muttered. At the same time, not necessarily her figure rapidly retreated. After all, the power of this attack was extraordinary. Public anger. It was a sure kill attack that she had nurtured with her mind. It's not like that bastard she would not use it unless it was a moment of life and death. Thinking back to what Yang Kai had done in the Yuan had died to this attack. He felt that it was inconceivable. Lu Xue slashed even though he was one of the leaders of Sword Pavilion, who was not far away, he did not dare to do something that offended the interests of everyone. A sword appeared in his hand out of thin air. But Yang Kai had done it with a swirl of sword light. It would have been fine if he had done it. His body was wrapped within the sword, but he was still alive and well afterwards. Man and sword became one as he slashed towards Yang Kai's waist. Kind of method would have any effect. Julie, on the other hand, that guy's madness retreated 100 meters in horror. Let's wait for a while. He was terrified of Yang Kai. Has already given the origin magnet mountain. Let's see how his methods died under Yang Kai's spear. Even though many days had passed, the scene was still vivid in his mind. Now that he suddenly saw Yang Kai appear not far from him, his first thought was to run away quickly before making any plans. The other leader of Thunderlight's sect was stunned for a moment, seemingly unable to react to what had happened. In the blink of an eye, Yang Kai grabbed the violet sword that had slashed out from between Lu Xue's brows. With a clang, the sword let out a clear and resonant hum that shot into the 9 heavens. Lu Xue's eyes instantly widened as shock filled her face. That was because Yang Kai was actually completely unscathed from her sure-kill attack. Not only that, Yang Kai was actually holding a 3-inch long, hiltless sword that glowed with violet light between his fingers. The sword seemed to possess a mind of its own as it struggled and trembled in Yang Kai's hand. However, no matter what, it was unable to break free from Yang Kai's grasp. Die! Right at this moment, Luo Qingyan slashed out furiously, directly striking Yang Kai's waist. A wisp of a smile couldn't help but appear on Luo Qingyan's face, and he seemed to have already seen the scene of Yang Kai being slashed into 2 by him and dying on the spot. The might of the full-force strike of his 4th-rank Heaven Splitter was utterly impossible for Yang Kai, who was in the Emperor realm, to resist. However, the rebounding force that came from his hand caused Qian Qingyan's smile to instantly stiffen. In his field of vision, Yang Kai's body was suddenly enveloped in a vigorous earth-yellow glow, and a prismatic earth element shield appeared to protect Yang Kai's body, blocking his front. That sword slashed onto the shield of earth. As expected of the full-force strike of a 4th-rank Heaven Splitter, even the solid shield of earth was actually unable to resist it, and it shattered with a clatter. The sword slashed past Yang Kai's waist and tore open a hole in his clothes. At the instant they brushed past each other, Yang Kai glanced indifferently at Luo Qingyan. The sword light dispersed to reveal Luo Qingyan's figure, and his expression was savage to the point of being slightly terrifying. This was because Yang Kai's glance just now had been filled with contempt, as if he was looking at an ant. With a cry of alarm, Luo Qingyan abruptly turned around, and when he saw what was happening, he couldn't help but explode with rage. Release her! Amidst the army of 10,000, Yang Kai's large hand gripped Lu Xue's slender neck as he hid behind her. He looked ahead from behind Lu Xue with a playful expression. 3 inches from Lu Xue's throat, a cold light flickered. At some point, Zhong Fan had arrived with his sword. He was at the 5th-rank Heaven Splitter, and in terms of strength and foundation, he was stronger than any of the Heaven Splitters present. The moment he saw Yang Kai attack Lu Xue, he immediately sensed Yang Kai's intentions, and immediately flew over to save her. However, even with Luo Qingyan's interference, he was still a little too late. By the time he arrived, Yang Kai had already grabbed Lu Xue and used her as a shield. With a shield like Lu Xue, how could Zhong Fan attack again? Their gazes met. Zhong Fan was seething with rage while his face warped. He pointed his sword forward, yet he was unable to move. Luo Qingyan had an anxious expression, Julie had a horrified expression, and Long Tai, who'd recovered from his shock, had an astounded expression as well. At this instant, countless gazes shot over. Yet it was perfectly silent. Everything that had happened in that instant just now had happened too quickly. Besides a few people, no one knew exactly what had happened, and by the time they reacted, the situation before them had already occurred. Countless people asked in their hearts, how could this have happened? How could Yang Kai have the courage to charge out? How could he receive Luo Qingyan's attack without being affected at all? How could Lu Xue be captured by him? Why didn't she resist at all? He saw Guizian's calmness, saw the fear and reluctance to live in the depths of these people's eyes, and saw the many expectations they had for him. Nodding slightly, Yang Kai said, "Don't worry if you die, I will bury these 3,000 people with you." As soon as these words came out, there was an uproar. Although Yang Kai had shown extraordinary combat strength before, and even Lu Shui, who was a fourth-grade heaven splitter, could not resist him, everyone knew that in the great cosmological realm, ordinary heaven splitters were no match for Yang Kai. But these words were too arrogant. Those were 3,000 people, not 3,000 radishes. Even if they stood there and let others kill them, it would take a long time, not to mention that there were several heaven splitters present, and the disciples of Sword Pavilion could form the Starfall Sword Array. Even if Crimson Star went all out, it was impossible for them to be opponents, let alone a mere Yang Kai. Someone secretly shook his head. Isn't this surnamed Yang a bit too arrogant? Does he really think he is invincible? Someone even sneered. Who doesn't know how to talk big? If you want me to go up, I can say a few words. Sigh, this kid, I thought he was a character. But who knew that his brain is a bit stupid? How can he say such words so casually? Even Yu He, who had been paying close attention in the mansion, frowned slightly. It was not that she did not believe in Yang Kai's strength. She had also seen Yang Kai join forces with Crimson Flood Dragon to defeat hundreds of people from Thunderlight Sect. But the 3,000 people in front of her were different. Thunderlight Sect had used all their strength, and Sword Pavilion also had 300 disciples here. Once the sword array was used, they were invincible. If Yang Kai relied on the Space Divine technique to deal with them, he might be able to defeat them. But it was a bit unrealistic to say that he could kill 3,000 people. Junior, you are young, but you talk big. Zhong Fan snorted coldly. You will know if I talk big, or not when you try. Yang Kai squinted. Old dog, now you have two choices. First, let my people go, and I will exchange this woman with you. Second, you kill my people, and I will send this woman to the Yellow Springs to be buried with them. Which one do you choose? Zhong Fan's face was so gloomy that it could almost condense water. Yang Kai's intention was obviously to exchange their hostages, but when it came out of his mouth, it sounded like a threat, making one feel uncomfortable. What made Zhong Fan feel even more helpless was that he could not ignore Lu Shui's life or death. For any force, a fourth-grade heaven splitter was a cornerstone that could not be lost. How do you expect this old master to believe you? Zhong Fan pondered for a moment before rolling his eyes. What if this old master releases her, and you go back on your word? Do you have a choice? Yang Kai sneered. Zhong Fan said, this old master will release half of her first. If you let her go, this old master will definitely release the other half. Yang Kai acted as if he did not hear and raised Lu Shui high in the air, his face filled with murderous intent. As if there was no one else present, he indifferently said, I will count to 3. If I don't see the result I want, you can just wait to collect this woman's corpse. 1. Junior, don't go too far. Zhong Fan was furious. Yang Kai's attitude was so unyielding that it was extremely infuriating. He'd already taken a step back and could release half of the hostages. Yet Yang Kai actually refused to accept it. How could he endure this under the gazes of everyone present? 2. Yang Kai remained unmoved and had a cold and indifferent expression. Luo Qingyun looked nervously at Zhong Fan, and he'd already clenched his sword tightly. He was only waiting for Yang Kai to shout out 3 before he launched an attack. According to this situation, even if Lu Shui went all out, she would be burned to death in less than half an hour. Turning his head, Zhong Fan saw Yang Kai looking at him with a playful expression, and suddenly realized why Yang Kai had released Lu Shui so easily. It turned out that it was not out of kindness, but because he had other plans. If he wanted Lu Shui to live, he had to help suppress this burning power. Otherwise Lu Shui would undoubtedly die, and besides him, no one else would be able to do anything. As a result, his 5th stage heaven opening strength would be completely suppressed, and there was no way for him to act. Gritting his teeth secretly, he had thought that this little brat was upright and heroic. But who would have thought that he was also despicable and shameless? He hated himself for having misjudged him, and wished he could gouge his eyes out. Kill him. After thinking for a moment, Zhong Fan let out a deep shout, and at the same time, rolled up his sleeves, wrapped Lu Shui, and quickly flew down somewhere, landing directly on a slope. When he put Lu Shui down, he shouted in a low voice, "Concentrate, suppress with all your strength, I will help you." Saying so, he circled around to Lu Shui's back and patted her on the back. Pure energy madly poured into Lu Shui's body, helping her suppress the burning power. Lu Shui did not dare to be negligent and sat down cross-legged, forming a series of hand seals, as she silently circulated her secret art. Seeing this situation, how could the countless cultivators inside and outside Star City not know that Yang Kai had secretly killed Lu Shui? Otherwise, how could Zhong Fan have taken Lu Shui to a relatively safe place to heal? That surnamed Yang is really good at scheming. As a result, Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect have lost 2 mid-stage heaven-opening cultivators. Even so what? They still have 3 mid-stage heaven-opening cultivators, not to mention the low-stage heaven-opening cultivators. There are at least 20 to 30 of them. Cleverness backfires on itself. Restraining Zhong Fan alone won't affect the overall situation. Does he really think he can fight more than 3,000 people alone? AI. In the face of absolute power, all schemes and tricks are useless. The crowd discussed spiritedly, and no one was optimistic about Yang Kai. They all felt that he had made an extremely wrong decision. If he really wanted to live, he should not have let Lu Shui go so easily. At this moment, Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect no longer had any worries. So how could they show mercy to him? Just as the atmosphere was tense, a vigorous voice suddenly rang out from Star City. "Boy, as long as you submit to this young master and become this young master's servant, this young master will guarantee your safety." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone turned their heads and saw a young man in luxurious clothes standing in the void, looking at Yang Kai with a smile on his face. Behind him stood 7 or 8 servants. Judging from the aura of this young man, he was only from the Emperor realm, but his clothes were either rich or noble. It seemed that he had an extraordinary background. But this was the great cosmological realm, so what if he had some background? For a time, many people discussed spiritedly, guessing which force this young man belonged to. His tone was so arrogant. Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect's 3,000 people were ready to attack. But he also spoke so arrogantly that he would guarantee Yang Kai's safety. Although the discussion was not loud, it clearly reached the young man's ears, which made him very unhappy. He could not help but snort coldly, with an arrogant expression. A guard behind him walked out, looked around, and said in a cold voice, "My young master is the descendant of Qing Ming Blessed Land's 3rd elder. Who dares to humiliate him?" As soon as these words fell, everyone was shocked speechless. Qing Ming Blessed Land was one of the 72 paradise. Even in the 3,000 worlds, it was a top force. To be able to serve as an elder in this blessed land, and be ranked 3rd, it meant that he was at least a high-rank heaven splitter. Coming from Qing Ming Blessed Land, and having a high-rank heaven splitter ancestor, his background was not small. If he insisted on protecting Yang Kai, Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect might have to consider the consequences of angering him. In the great cosmological realm, he could not do anything to Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect. But what about outside? He could probably destroy Sword Pavilion and Thunderlight Sect with just a word. His request was indeed a little excessive. He wanted Yang Kai to submit to him and be his servant. But in the face of life and death, it was good enough to have a choice. Who would care so much? What's more, this young man had a great background, so being a servant to such a person might not be a bad thing. Even Luo Qingyun and the others who were about to attack froze in place, not knowing whether to attack or not. They stared nervously at Yang Kai, afraid that he would agree. Observing the situation, the young man's expression became even more arrogant. He nodded at Yang Kai and said, "Boy, if you miss this opportunity, you won't have this opportunity again. Think carefully before you answer this young master."